Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. Chapter 2. Reincarnation was always a big topic with Gabriel, for 15 years the biggest star in the history of the Indian movies, even before he miraculously defeated the phantom bug that everyone had begun to believe would terminate his contracts. So maybe someone should have been able to forecast, only nobody did, that when he was up and about again, he would, so to speak, succeed where the germs had failed and walk out of his old life forever within a week of his 40th birthday, vanishing, poof, like a trick, into thin air. The first people to notice his absence were the 4 members of his film studio wheelchair team. Long before his illness, he had formed the habit of being transported from set to set on the great D.W. Rama lot by this group of speedy, trusted athletes, because a man who makes up to 11 movies simultaneous needs to conserve his energies. Guided by a complex coding system of slashes, circles and dots which Gabriel remembered from his childhood among the fabled lunch runners of Bombay, of which more later, the chairmen zoomed him from role to role, delivering him as punctually and unerringly as once his father had delivered lunch. And after each take, Gabriel would skip back into the chair and be navigated at high speed towards the next set, to be recostumed, made up, and handed his lines. A career in the Bombay talkies, he told his loyal crew, is more like a wheelchair race with 1-2 pit stops along the route. After the illness, the ghostly germ, the mystery malaise, the bug, he'd returned to work, easing himself in, only 7 pictures at a time, and then just like that, he wasn't there. The wheelchair stood empty among the silent sound stages. His absence revealed the tawdry shamming of the set. Wheelchairmen 1 to 4 made excuses for the missing star when movie executives descended upon them in wrath. Gee, he must be sick. He has always been famous for his punctual no, why to criticize? Maharaj, great artists must from time to time be permitted their temperament, nah, and for their protestations they became the first casualties of Farisha's unexplained hey presto, being fired, 4321, ekdum jaldi, ejected from studio gates, so that a wheelchair lay abandoned and gathering dust beneath the painted cocoa palms around a sawdust beach. Where was Gabriel? Movie producers, left in 7 lurches, panicked expensively. See there, at the Willingdon Club golf links, only 9 holes nowadays, skyscrapers having sprouted out of the other 9 like giant weeds, or let's say like tombstones, marking the sites where the torn corpse of the old city lay. There, right there, upper echelon executives, missing the simplest putts, and, look above, tufts of anguished hair, torn from senior heads, wafting down from high-level windows. The agitation of the producers was easy to understand, because in those days of declining audiences and the creation of historical soap operas and contemporary crusading housewives by the television network, there was but a single name which, when set above a picture's tide, could still offer a surefire cent% guarantee of an ultra-hit, a smashation. And the owner of said name had departed, up, down, or sideways, but certainly and unarguably vamoosed. All over the city, after telephones, motorcyclists, cops, frogmen and trawlers dragging the harbour for his body had laboured mightily, but to no avail. Epitaphs began to be spoken in memory of the darkened star. On one of Rama Studios' 7 impotent stages, Miss Pimple Billimoria, the latest Chilean spices, bombshell. She's no flibbity-gibbety mamzelle, but a worse stir get lost's a bundle of dynamite, clad in temple dancer veiled undress, and positioned beneath writhing cardboard representations of copulating tantric figures from the Chandela period, and perceiving that her major scene was not to be, her big break lay in pieces, offered up a spiteful farewell before an audience of sound recordists and electricians smoking their cynical beaders, attended by a dumbly distressed Aya, all elbows. Pimple attempted scorn. "God, what a stroke of luck, for Pete's sake," she cried. "I mean, today it was the love scene, Chi-Chi. I was just dying inside thinking how to go near to that fatmuth with his breath of rotting cockroach dung." Bell-heavy anklets jingled as she stamped. "Damn good for him the movies don't smell, or he wouldn't get one job as a leper even." Here Pimple's soliloquy climaxed in such a torrent of obscenities that the beady smokers sat up for the first time and commenced animatedly to compare Pimple's vocabulary with that of the infamous bandit queen Phulan Devi, whose oaths could melt rifle barrels and turn journalists' pencils to rubber in a trice. Exit Pimple, weeping, censored, a scrap on a cutting room floor. Rhinestones fell from her navel as she went, mirroring her tears. In the matter of Farishta's halitosis, she was not, however, altogether wrong. If anything, she had a little understated the case. Jibriel's exhalations, those ochre clouds of sulphur and brimstone, had always given him, when taken together with his pronounced widow's peak and crow-black hair, an air more saturnine than haloed, in spite of his archangelic name. It was said after he disappeared that he ought to have been easy to find. All it took was a halfway decent nose. And 1 week after he took off, an exit more tragic than Pimple Billimoria's did, much to intensify the devilish odor that was beginning to attach itself to that for-so-long sweet-smelling name. You could say that he had stepped out of the screen into the world, and in life, unlike the cinema, people know it if you stink. We are creatures of air, our roots in dreams and clouds, reborn in flight. Goodbye. The enigmatic note discovered by the police in Gabriel Farishta's penthouse, located on the top floor of the Everest Villa skyscraper on Malabar Hill, the highest home in the highest building on the highest ground in the city. One of those double vista apartments from which you could look this way across the evening necklace of Marine Drive, or that way out to Scandal Point and the sea, permitted the newspaper headlines to prolong their cacophonies. Farishta dives underground, opined Blitz in somewhat macabre fashion, while Busy Bee in the Daily preferred Jibril flies coop. Many photographs were published of that fabled residence in which French interior decorators bearing letters of commendation from Reza Pahlavi for the work they had done at Persepolis had spent $1 million recreating at this exalted altitude the effect of a Bedouin tent. Another illusion unmade by his absence. Gabriel strikes camp, the headlines yelled, but had he gone up or down or sideways? No one knew. In that metropolis of tongues and whispers, not even the sharpest ears heard anything reliable. But Mrs. Wrecker Merchant, reading all the papers, listening to all the radio broadcasts, staying glued to the DoorDash and TV programs, gleaned something from Farishta's message, heard a note that eluded everyone else, and took her 2 daughters and 1 son for a walk on the roof of her high-rise home. Its name was Everest Villas. His neighbor, as a matter of fact, from the apartment directly beneath his own. His neighbor and his friend. Why should I say any more? Of course the scandal-pointed malice magazines of the city filled their columns with hint, innuendo, and nudge, but that's no reason for sinking to their level. Why tarnish her reputation now? Who was she? Rich, certainly, but then Everest Velas was not exactly a tenement in Kula, eh? Married, yes sir, 13 years, with a husband big in ball bearings. Independent, her carpet and antique showrooms thriving at their prime Calabar sites. She called her carpets Clims and Cleans, and the ancient artifacts were antiques. Yes, and she was beautiful. Beautiful in the hard, glossy manner of those rarefied occupants of the city's sky homes. Her bone-skin posture, all bearing witness to her long divorce from the impoverished, heavy, pullulating earth. Everyone agreed she had a strong personality, drank like a fish from Lalique crystal, and hung her hat shameless on a chola natraj, and knew what she wanted and how to get it, fast. The husband was a mouse with money and a good squash wrist. Wrecker merchant read Gabriel Farishta's farewell note in the newspapers, wrote a letter of her own, gathered her children, summoned the elevator, and rose heavenward, one story, to meet her chosen fate. Many years ago, her letter read, I married out of cowardice. Now finally, I'm doing something brave. She left a newspaper on her bed with Gabriel's message circled in red and heavily underscored, 3 harsh lines, one of them ripping the page in fury. So naturally the bitch journals went to town, and it was all Lovely's lovelorn leap, and broken-hearted beauty takes last dive. But perhaps she too had the rebirth bug, and Gabriel, not understanding the terrible power of metaphor, had recommended flight. To be born again, first you have to, and she was a creature of the sky. She drank Lalique champagne, she lived on Everest, and one of her fellow Olympians had flown, and if he could, then she too could be winged and rooted in dreams. She didn't make it. The Lala who was employed as gatekeeper of the Everest Velas compound offered the world his blunt testimony. I was walking, here in the compound only, when there came a thud, Tharap. I turned. It was the body of the oldest daughter. Her skull was completely crushed. I looked up and saw the boy falling, and after him the younger girl. What to say, they almost hit me where I stood. I put my hand on my mouth and came to them. The young girl was whining softly. Then I looked up a further time, and the Begum was coming. Her sari was floating out like a big balloon, and all her hair was loose. I took my eyes away from her because she was falling, and it was not respectful to look up inside her clothes. Reka and her children fell from Everest, no survivors. The whispers blamed Gabriel. Let's leave it at that for the moment. Oh, don't forget, he saw her after she died. He saw her several times. It was a long time before people understood how sick the great man was. Gabriel, the star. Gabriel, who vanquished the nameless ailment. Gabriel, who feared sleep. After he departed, the ubiquitous images of his face began to rot. On the gigantic, luridly coloured hoardings from which he had watched over the populace, his lazy eyelids started flaking and crumbling, drooping further and further until his irises looked like 2 moons sliced by clouds, or by the soft knives of his long lashes. Finally the eyelids fell off, giving a wild, bulging look to his painted eyes. Outside the picture palaces of Bombay, mammoth cardboard effigies of Gabriel were seen to decay and list. Dangling limply on their sustaining scaffolds, they lost arms, withered, snapped at the neck. His portraits on the covers of movie magazines acquired the pallor of death, a nullity about the eye, a hollowness. At last his images simply faded off the printed page, so that the shiny covers of Celebrity and Society and Illustrated Weekly went blank at the bookstalls, and their publishers fired the printers and blamed the quality of the ink. Even on the silver screen itself, high above his worshippers in the dark, that supposedly immortal physiognomy began to putrefy, blister and bleach. Projectors jammed unaccountably every time he passed through the gate, his films ground to a halt, and the lamp heat of the malfunctioning projectors burned his celluloid memory away, a star gone supernova, with a consuming fire spreading outwards, as was fitting, from his lips. It was the death of God, or something very like it, for had not that outsized face, suspended over its devotees in the artificial cinematic night, shone like that of some supernal entity that had its being at least halfway between the mortal and the divine. More than halfway, many would have argued, for Gabriel had spent the greater part of his unique career incarnating, with absolute conviction, the countless deities of the subcontinent in the popular genre movies known as theologicals. It was part of the magic of his persona that he succeeded in crossing religious boundaries without giving offense. Blue-skinned as Krishna he danced, flute in hand, amongst the beauteous gopis and their udder-heavy cows, with upturned palms, serene he meditated, as Gautama, upon humanity's suffering beneath a studio rickety Bodhi tree. On those infrequent occasions when he descended from the heavens, he never went too far, playing, for example, both the Grand Mughal and his famously wily minister in the classic Akbar and Birbal. For over a decade and a half he had represented, to hundreds of millions of believers in that country, in which to this day the human population outnumbers the divine by less than 3-1, the most acceptable and instantly recognizable face of the Supreme. For many of his fans, the boundary separating the performer and his roles had long ago ceased to exist. The fans, yes, and how about Gabriel? That face, in real life, reduced to life size, set amongst ordinary mortals, it stood revealed as oddly unstarry. Those low-slung eyelids could give him an exhausted look. There was, too, something coarse about the nose. The mouth was too well fleshed to be strong. The ears were long-lobed like young knurled jackfruit. The most profane of faces, the most sensual of faces, in which, of late, it had been possible to make out the seams mined by his recent, near-fatal illness. And yet, in spite of profanity and debilitation, this was a face inextricably mixed up with holiness, perfection, grace, God stuff. No accounting for tastes, that's all. At any rate, you'll agree that for such an actor, for any actor, maybe even for Chamcha, but most of all for him, to have a bee in his bonnet about avatars, like much metamorphosed Vishnu, was not so very surprising. Rebirth, that's God stuff too. Or but, then again, not always. There are secular reincarnations too. Gabriel Farishta had been born Ismail Najmuddin in Pune, British Pune, at the empire's fag end, long before the Pune of Rajneesh etc. Pune, Vadodara, Mumbai, even towns can take stage names nowadays. Ismail after the child involved in the sacrifice of Ibrahim, and Najmuddin, star of the faith. He'd given up quite a name when he took the angels. Afterwards, when the aircraft Boston was in the grip of the hijackers, and the passengers, fearing for their futures, were regressing into their pasts, Gabriel confided to Saladin Chamcha that his choice of pseudonym had been his way of making a homage to the memory of his dead mother, My mummy G Spoono, my one and only Mamo, because who else was it who started the whole angel business? Her personal angel, she called me Farishta, because apparently I was too damn sweet, believe it or not. I was good as goddamn gold. Hold him, he was taken in his Puna couldn't hold him, he was taken in his infancy to the Bitchity, his first migration. His father got a job amongst the fleet-footed, inspirers of future wheelchair quartets, the lunch porters or dabawallahs of Bombay. And Ismail the Farishta followed, at 13, in his father's footsteps. Gibreel, captive aboard AI 420, sank into forgivable rhapsodies, fixing Chamcha with his glittering eye, explicating the mysteries of the runner's coding system, black swastika, red circle, yellow /dot, running in his mind's eye the entire relay from home to office desk. That improbable system by which 2,000 dabawallahs delivered, each day, over 100,000 lunch pails, and on a bad day, Spoono, maybe 15 got mislaid. We were illiterate, mostly, but the signs were our secret tongue. Bostan circled London, gunmen patrolling the gangways, and the lights in the passenger cabins had been switched off, but Gibreel's energy illuminated the gloom. On the grubby movie screen on which, earlier in the journey, the in-flight inevitability of Walter Matthau had stumbled lugubriously into the aerial ubiquity of Goldie Hawn. There were shadows moving, projected by the nostalgia of the hostages, and the most sharply defined of them was this spindly adolescent, Ismail Najmuddin, mummy's angel in a Gandhi cap, running tiffins across the town. The young Dabawala skipped nimbly through the shadow crowd, because he was used to such conditions. Think, Spoono, picture 30-40 tiffins in a long wooden tray on your head, and when the local train stops you have maybe 1 minute to push on or off, and then running in the streets, flat out, with the trucks, buses, scooters, cycles, and what all. 1, 2, 1, 2, lunch, the dabbas must get through. And in the monsoon running down the railway line when the train broke down, or waist deep in water in some flooded street. And there were gangs, Salad Baba, truly, organized gangs of dabba stealers. It's a hungry city, baby, what to tell you, but we could handle them, we were everywhere, knew everything. What thieves could escape our eyes and ears? We never went to any policia, we looked after our own. At night, father and son would return exhausted to their shack by the airport runway at Santa Cruz, and when Ismail's mother saw him approaching, illuminated by the green, red, yellow of the departing jet planes, she would say that simply to lay eyes on him made all her dreams come true, which was the first indication that there was something peculiar about Gibreel, because from the beginning, it seemed, he could fulfill people's most secret desires without having any idea of how he did it. His father, Najmuddin Sr., never seemed to mind that his wife had eyes only for her son, that the boy's feet received nightly pressings while the father's went unstroked. A son is a blessing, and a blessing requires the gratitude of the blessed. Naima Najmuddin died. A bus hit her, and that was that. Gibreel wasn't around to answer her prayers for life. Neither father nor son ever spoke of grief. Silently, as though it were customary and expected, they buried their sadness beneath extra work, engaging in an inarticulate contest. Who could carry the most dabbers on his head? Who could acquire the most new contracts per month? Who could run faster, as though the greater labor would indicate the greater love? When he saw his father at night, the knotted veins bulging in his neck and at his temples, Ismail Najmuddin would understand how much the older man had resented him, and how important it was for the father to defeat the son and regain, thereby, his usurped primacy in the affections of his dead wife. Once he realized this, the youth eased off, but his father's zeal remained unrelenting, and pretty soon he was getting promotion, no longer a mere runner, but one of the organizing muqaddams. Gibril was 19. When Gibril was 19, Najmuddin Sr. became a member of the Lunch Runners Guild, the Bombay Tiffin Carriers Association, and when Gibril was 20, his father was dead, stopped in his tracks by a stroke that almost blew him apart. "He just ran himself into the ground," said the Guild's General Secretary, Baba Saheb Matre himself. "That poor bastard, he just ran out of steam." But the orphan knew better. He knew that his father had finally run hard enough and long enough to wear down the frontiers between the worlds. He had run clear out of his skin and into the arms of his wife, to whom he had proved once and for all the superiority of his love. Some migrants are happy to depart. Baba Saheb Matre sat in a blue office behind a green door above a labyrinthine bazaar, an awesome figure, Buddha-fat, one of the great moving forces of the metropolis, possessing the occult gift of remaining absolutely still, never shifting from his room, and yet being everywhere important and meeting everyone who mattered in Bombay. The day after young Ismail's father ran across the border to see Naima, the Baba Saheb summoned the young man into his presence. "So, upset or what?" The reply with downcast eyes, "Gee, thank you Babaji, I am okay." "Shut your face," said Baba Saheb Matre. "From today you live with me." But Babaji, "But me no buts. Already I have informed my good wife, I have spoken." "Please excuse Babaji, but how, what, why? I have spoken." Gibril Farishta was never told why the Baba Saheb had decided to take pity on him and pluck him from the futurelessness of the streets, but after a while he began to have an idea. Mrs. Matre was a thin woman, like a pencil beside the rubbery Baba Saheb, but she was filled so full of mother love that she should have been fat like a potato. When the Baba came home, she put sweets into his mouth with her own hands, and at nights the newcomer to the household could hear the great General Secretary of the BTCA protesting, "Let me go, wife, I can undress myself." At breakfast, she spoon-fed Mahatre with large helpings of malt, and before he went to work she brushed his hair. They were a childless couple, and young Najmuddin understood that the Baba Saheb wanted him to share the load. Oddly enough, however, the Begum did not treat the young man as a child. "You see, he is a grown fellow," she told her husband when poor Matre pleaded. "Give the boy the blasted spoon of malt." "Yes, a grown fellow. We must make a man of him, husband, no babying for him." "Then damn it to hell," the Baba Saheb exploded. "Why do you do it to me?" Mrs. Matre burst into tears. "But you are everything to me," she wept. "You are my father, my lover, my baby too. You are my lord and my suckling child. If I displease you, then I have no life." Baba Saheb Matre, accepting defeat, swallowed the tablespoon of malt. He was a kindly man, which he disguised with insults and noise. To console the orphaned youth, he would speak to him, in the blue office, about the philosophy of rebirth, convincing him that his parents were already being scheduled for re-entry somewhere, unless of course their lives had been so holy that they had attained the final grace. So it was Mahatre who started Farishta off on the whole reincarnation business, and not just reincarnation. The Baba Saheb was an amateur psychic, a tapper of table legs and a bringer of spirits into glasses. "But I gave that up," he told his protege. with many suitably melodramatic inflections, gestures, frowns, after I got the fright of my bloody life. Once, Matra recounted, the glass had been visited by the most cooperative of spirits, such a too friendly fellow, see, so I thought to ask him some big questions. Is there a God? And that glass, which had been running round like a mouse or so, just stopped dead, middle of table, not a twitch, completely kaput. So then, okay, I said, if you won't answer that, try this one instead. And I came right out with it. Is there a devil? After that the glass, baprabap, began to shake. Catch your ears. Slow at first, then faster, like a jelly, until it jumped, eye high, up from the table into the air, fell down on its side, and oh ho! Into 1,001 pieces, smashed. Believe, don't believe, Babasaheb Matre told his charge, but then and there I learned my lesson, don't meddle, Mahatre, in what you do not comprehend. This story had a profound effect on the consciousness of the young listener, because even before his mother's death, he had become convinced of the existence of the supernatural world. Sometimes when he looked around him, especially in the afternoon heat when the air turned glutinous, the visible world, its features and inhabitants and things, seemed to be sticking up through the atmosphere like a profusion of hot icebergs, and he had the idea that everything continued down below the surface of the soupy air. People, motorcars, dogs, movie billboards, trees, 9/10 of their reality concealed from his eyes. He would blink, and the illusion would fade, but the sense of it never left him. He grew up believing in God, angels, demons, afrits, jinns, as matter-of-factly as if they were bullock carts or lamp posts, and it struck him as a failure in his own sight that he had never seen a ghost. He would dream of discovering a magic optometrist from whom he would purchase a pair of green-tinged spectacles which would correct his regrettable myopia, and after that he would be able to see through the dense, blinding air to the fabulous world beneath. From his mother Naima Najmuddin he heard a great many stories of the Prophet, and if inaccuracies had crept into her versions he wasn't interested in knowing what they were. What a man, he thought. What angel would not wish to speak to him? Sometimes, though, he caught himself in the act of forming blasphemous thoughts, for example, when, without meaning to, as he drifted off to sleep in his cot at the Matre residence, his somnolent fancy began to compare his own condition with that of the Prophet at the time when, having been orphaned and short of funds, he made a great success of his job as the business manager of the wealthy widow Khadija, and ended up marrying her as well. As he slipped into sleep, he saw himself sitting on a rose-strewn dais, simpering shyly beneath the sari palu which he had placed demurely over his face, while his new husband, Babasaheb Mahatre, reached lovingly towards him to remove the fabric and gaze at his features in a mirror placed in his lap. This dream of marrying the Babasaheb brought him awake, flushing hotly for shame, and after that he began to worry about the impurity in his makeup that could create such terrible visions. Mostly, however, his religious faith was a low-key thing, a part of him that required no more special attention than any other. When Babasaheb Matre took him into his home, it confirmed to the young man that he was not alone in the world, that something was taking care of him. So he was not entirely surprised when the Babasaheb called him into the Blue Office on the morning of his 21st birthday and sacked him without even being prepared to listen to an appeal. "You're fired," Matre emphasized, beaming. cashiered, had your chips, dismiss. But uncle, shut your face. Then the Baba Saheb gave the orphan the greatest present of his life, informing him that a meeting had been arranged for him at the studios of the legendary film magnate Mr. D.W. Rama, an audition. It is for appearance only, the Baba Saheb said. Rama is my good friend and we have discussed a small part to begin, then it is up to you. Now get out of my sight and stop pulling such humble faces, it does not suit. But uncle, boy like you is too damn good looking to carry tiffins on his head all his life. Get gone now, go, be a homosexual movie actor, I fired you 5 minutes back. But uncle, I have spoken, thank your lucky stars.